After the midterm exams, the school issued a notice for the second-year high school students to participate in the physical fitness test for the college entrance examination, urging everyone to practice in advance and be prepared. During the morning self-study session, classmates began a lively discussion about the physical fitness test. Why hasn't she come yet? Just as the class was about to start, Luo Yichuan turned his head and pointed to Ju Mei's seat to ask. Lin Zhu was just shaking his head when she saw Ju Mei burst into the classroom and rush to the table to extend her hand to her. Language arts, lend me your paper to copy. You didn't write again? Luo Yichuan turned his head to look at Ju Mei, asking with an exasperated face. I was a bit busy last night and didn't have time to write. Ju Mei's hands were trembling. The eliminator is coming soon. Hurry up, Lin Zhu. Hurst up. Lin Zhu gave her the paper while holding back her laughter. Didn't she get mad at you because you didn't memorize the text in the last class? She said she would focus on you in this class. Why didn't you write it? I didn't want to either. My parents went out of town to purchase goods, and I had to fight with a drunk when I was watching the shop last night. I ended up at the police station instead of finishing my homework. In the middle of the night, my little brother developed a high fever, and I had been running around at the hospital to now. I couldn't even sleep well, Ju Mei said while quickly copying the answers. Are you okay? Both Lin Zhu and Luo Yichuan asked simultaneously. Ju Mei looked at Luo Yichuan surprisingly, then turned to Lin Zhu and said, I'm fine, just feel very sleepy. Only then did Lin Zhu notice the red swelling on Ju Mei's wrist. Take out the papers from yesterday. The teacher known as the Eliminator, Miss Zhu, walked into the classroom in high heels, looming the first question. Ju Mei quickly threw back Lin Zhu's paper. Good, next, the second question. When it was Ju Mei's turn, it was a long imitation question. Ju Mei stood up, grabbed Luo Yichuan's paper, and read it aloud with great emotion. Well written, Miss Zhu nodded in satisfaction. Sit down, let your deskmate answer this question too. Ju Mei was about to sit down when she froze. Luo Yichuan slowly got up, lowered his head and remained silent. At this time, Miss Zhu spoke again. Ju Mei, was your answer just now your own? Ju Mei dropped her head and was about to return the paper to Luo Yichuan, confessing the truth, but Luo Yichuan held her wrist. Teacher, I didn't bring my homework. He raised his head, his voice loud. You didn't bring it? Luckily your dad won't have class until the second period. Let him find and bring it to you. No need, teacher. Luo Yichuan scratched his head. I didn't write it. Miss Zhu clapped the teaching plan in her hand on the podium. You didn't write it. Miss Zhu stared at Luo Yichuan coldly. Take your paper, stand in the corridor and write. Luo Yichuan remained silent, quietly pulled out the paper that Ju Mei had copied a few answers from her desk, took a pen and walked out of the classroom. Continue the class, next, the next question. Miss Zhu slowly appeased her anger. Lin Zhu got up to answer the question, noticing that Ju Mei's fingers holding Luo Yichuan's paper trembled slightly. 2 periods of language arts class were consecutive. During the break, Lin Zhu accompanied Ju Mei to find Luo Yichuan in the corridor. They saw Yifeng joking around and asking him various questions. Yo, brother-in-law, didn't write your homework? That's not like you. Are you being rebellious recently? Luo Yichuan kicked Yifeng, but he almost lost his balance. Are your legs okay? Yifeng suddenly became serious. Shall we tell your teacher? Your leg is still injured. It's okay, don't worry about me, go back. Your leg is okay. Ju Mei stammered for the first time. Why did you take the blame for me? You look too miserable. Luo Yichuan dropped his mouth. I'm just overflowing with sympathy. Is that okay? I'll go and explain it to the teacher. You don't have to stand. Ju Mei turned to leave but was pulled back by Luo Yichuan. Hey, wait. I've been standing for a whole class period, and you're telling me it wasn't in vain. Ju Mei stood in place, her eyes somewhat teary. Luo Yichuan was taken aback, no longer playful, and spoke softly. Go back to sleep for a bit, I'm alright really. Ju Mei returned to her seat, seeming to have lost her soul for the rest of the day. Is the occurrence of love uncontrollable? Lin Zhu didn't know if Ju Mei had fallen for Luo Yichuan because of this incident, but she had indeed started to like him, and so this affection was doomed to be a calamity, because her love rival was none other than the nearly perfect Yi Zhao. In the cafeteria, Ju Mei no longer talked non-stop about gossip or laughed loudly and heartlessly as she used to, but stared at Yifeng's dining table for a long time and absent-mindedly asked the girl sitting across from Yifeng, is that Yi Zhao? Lin Zhu nodded. She does have a good temperament. Ju Mei lowered her head and took a mouthful of rice, then slowly added, No wonder Luo Yichuan likes her. Lin Zhu remained silent. If Yi Feng also had someone he liked, she would probably be even more upset than Zhu Mei, right? But is she now supposed to persuade Zhu Mei to stop liking Luo Yichuan? She herself isn't a stranger to liking someone. What to do to not like someone? Since the day she saw Yi Zhao, Zhu Mei seemed to have completely changed. She suddenly cut her medium-length hair into a neat bob like Yi Zhao's, no longer hoarded snacks on her desk and started wearing white pleated skirts, and was making great efforts to improve her grades. Old Luo was very moved by Zhu Mei's daily visits to his office to ask questions and even praised her prominently in class. Has she been hexed? As Zhu Mei went to ask another math question, Luo Yichuan turned to Lin Zhu, frowning. Maybe she has someone she likes. Lin Zhu blinked and replied with a smiling face. She has someone she likes? Luo Yichuan's eyes widened in realization. My dad. Get out. Lin Zhu was furious. Then why is she studying math every day and running to my dad's office? No more talking with you. Lin Zhu lowered her head to do her work, ignoring him. In a short while, Zhu Mei in her white short skirt, holding her workbook, returned to the classroom and started studying as soon as she sat down. Hey, you're the first girl I've seen who can make a skirt look like shorts. Luo Yichuan playfully nudged Zhu Mei's arm. And then, 2 workbooks flew from the side and diagonally behind him, hitting his head. For the entire week before the physical fitness test, Lin Zhu spent her night study breaks training for the 800-meter run on the playground. With her was Lu Ming. Rumor had it that the well-respected Lu Ming had always been frail since he was a child, lagging behind in physical education. Seeing Lu Ming, who was always put on a pedestal, worry about physical education gave Lin Zhu a strange sense of reality. He wasn't the all-capable figure that he was made up to be. How about we run at the same time, 3 laps in total, and see who finishes first? In a casual tone, Lu Ming proposed during a break. Sure, answered Lin Zhu, surprised yet willing. There was something about a competition that sparked a fire within her, especially when the opponent was Lu Ming. Yi Feng had mentioned that he didn't like Lu Ming. He even expressed his wish that she could surpass Lu Ming and get the first rank. In academics, she felt she might be struggling, though outrunning Lu Ming brought her immense satisfaction and joy. It was as if she was fulfilling a wish for Yi Feng. By the time she crossed the finish line, Lu Ming was still half a lap behind. She collapsed onto the rubber track, panting heavily. As she rubbed her sore calves, she looked up at Lu Ming, who was trotting towards her. He always looked calm and composed, even when facing sports he wasn't good at. His face showed no signs of panic. Lu Ming, the top scorer in the city's middle school exams, the selfish jerk who betrayed his friends in a competitive exam. Lu Ming finally crossed the finish line. He also squatted down beside her, one hand clasping his knee. On the chilly playground, the moon hid behind a thin layer of clouds, projecting a dim and mysterious glow. I was born with a poor physical constitution. No matter how hard I train, I can't pass the grade, Lu Ming said in a low voice, sipping from his water bottle and wiping the droplets from the corner of his lips. So I took a job in the student union to check attendance during drills, often skipping PE class citing studies as an excuse, just to avoid embarrassment. Lin Zhu listened quietly, unsure of what to say. I think we're quite similar, Lu Ming continued, seemingly not needing her response, but you're stronger than me. I really admire you. Lu Ming was the second person, after Yi Feng, to communicate his admiration for her. These 2 unreachable beings, yet sincerely confessing their admiration for her. She initiated various conversations with Lu Ming throughout the evening, talking about a wide range of topics from his study habits and problem-solving techniques to their past relationships, their interest in science, the school's academic top 5, to Yi Feng. She never missed an opportunity to mention Yi Feng's name when talking to anyone who knew him, yet she always managed to discreetly bring him up, concealing his name securely within her multiple topics. She liked to hear others' opinions of him, hoping that everyone else would appreciate and like him too. However, Lu Ming's evaluations were largely unproductive, mainly praising Yi Feng's smartness and capability. The competition examination and the person that is Lu Ming became restricted topics that Lin Zhu deliberately avoided when starting conversations. She knew in her heart that she couldn't be friends with Lu Ming. Perhaps it was his inherent indifference or his perpetually casual pretense, or maybe it was simply because Yi Feng didn't like him. On the day of the physical fitness test, Lin Zhu's auntie came early and she had to wait for a retest a week later. She leaned against the soccer goalpost, clutching her belly, her hand blocking the glaring sunlight from her forehead. Then, squinting, she silently watched Yifeng in his dark gray sweater running down the track. He ran fast, leaving the second place far behind. He even waved to his teachers and classmates with a bright smile, and even just before the finish line, he turned around, spread his arms, and ran backwards across it. This was one of the countless moments she felt he was out of her reach. Is there anything in this world that he's not good at or can't do? He is a person who runs faster than time itself. And she just happened to fall for such a person. Even though his proud posture was more dazzling than the sunlight above his head, she just couldn't bear to close her eyes. In the retest list, only Lin Zhu and Lu Ming from Class 16 Year 1 were listed. On the field, the scattered students were doing warm-up exercises for the retest. Lin Zhu glanced at Lu Ming. His face was as carefree as usual. She wasn't sure if the school's notice that failure in the physical fitness test would result in disqualification from the college entrance examination was true, but the physical education teacher's repeated emphasis that failure in the physical fitness test would absolutely affect your college entrance examination made her feel nervous. For Lu Ming, the students retesting were divided into two groups, boys and girls, on two different tracks. At the sound of the gunshot, Lin Zhu dashed off. By the end of the first lap, her legs were getting more and more sour. The cold wind rushed into her chest through her open mouth. The pain in her chest was like being torn apart. The thin girl running in front of Lin Zhu also took smaller and smaller steps. Her head with the double ponytails drooped low, making Lin Zhu feel that the girl in front of her might faint after running just a few more steps. However, just as she was about to fall forward, a tall and thin boy suddenly passed her by, reaching out to steady the girl and preventing her from falling. Then the boy, holding the girl's arm, ran faster and faster, leaving a physically drained Lin Zhu far behind. The invigilating teachers chatted in groups of 2 or 3 and occasionally shouted towards the field, no aiding each other in running, but they still couldn't prevent the 3 or 4 boys who were running with their girlfriends. Watching the paired figures in front of her, Lin Zhu felt a hint of envy and frustration. Didn't everyone have someone to run with them? She did too. It was just that he would never suddenly appear in front of her, holding her hand and running with her. Instead, he would continue to smile and wave at her from within her heart. Little sister Lin, hang in there, run a bit faster. Run a bit faster, and you'll be able to catch up with me. As she squinted, staring at the distorted red plastic track in front of her, the upright figure of him running backwards towards the finish line a week earlier seems to appear in her mind. Suddenly, her leaden legs were filled with strength. She took large strides, enduring the tearing pain in her throat, and ran forward unreservedly. The person she liked was such a proud person. So, she simply couldn't afford to lose. It was not until Lin Zhu reported her results, bending over and clutching her legs for breath, that she noticed Lu Ming, who was still jogging on the track next to her. Only 2 or 3 boys were left on the big field, and Lu Ming was far behind, probably making it difficult to pass. She remembered the girls earlier who were led by their boyfriends. If they had to rely on themselves, they probably wouldn't have passed either. In this place, only she and Lu Ming are classmates. If she doesn't help him, what if he really can't take the college entrance examination? Perhaps old Luo should be more worried about this problem. But at this time, he needed someone to pull him up, and there wasn't much time left. She gave her still trembling and burning cheeks a pat, forced her sour and soft legs apart, and ran hard to the side of Lu Ming. She grabbed his arm and rushed forward. Hey, that girl? You're not allowed to run away, did you hear? The whistle of the physical education teacher sounded. What are you doing? Lu Ming stumbled as she pulled him. Her blood was pulsating at her temples and her lungs felt like they were going to explode the next moment. Don't talk, I feel nauseous. Lu Ming looked at her blankly, his lips slightly pursed, but his steps quickened a lot. Finally, near the finish line, the physical education teacher couldn't stand it anymore and was about to come and catch people. She let go of Lu Ming's hand, her legs completely collapsed, and she fell straight down on the track. Are you okay? Lu Ming quickly stopped to help her up. Keep running. She frowned and waved her hand hard, hoarsely said, Don't worry about me. Lu Ming frowned, bit his lip, and ran hard to the finish line. Lin Zhu watched his fast-paced figure and felt like she was being pissed off by him. Why didn't you run so fast just now? After it was over, Lu Ming opened a bottle of water and gave it to her, asking, Why did you help me? Only the 2 of us are classmates here, she answered as a matter of course. That's not a classmate's duty, he laughed gently. Huh? Lin Zhu didn't hear clearly. Nothing, thank you. He squinted his eyes, shrugged. How about letting you get the first place in the final exam? Lin Zhu gave him a hard look. Back in class in the afternoon, Luo Yichuan turned his head with a thief's smile. "Hey, I heard you like Lu Ming." The water Lin Zhu just poured into her mouth almost choked into her trachea. "Who said that?" "Students from other classes have seen it, saying that you just finished running and went to run with Lu Ming and you fell down." "That's because there are only me and him in our class." "Stop it," Luo Yichuan sneered. "This is not a classmate's duty, right? I really don't like him. If you talk nonsense, be careful, I'll hit you." Lin Zhu picked up the English textbook and slammed it hard on him. "Hey, how can you learn to hit people like Ju Mei? By the way, where is Ju Mei?" Lin Zhu asked. "In my dad's office, asking questions." Luo Yichuan shook his head helplessly with a sigh. Lin Zhu warmed up in her heart and smiled. After dinner, the sky suddenly snowed heavily. Lin Zhu was responsible for getting water for the class today. When she was carrying 2 thermoses and shivering in the snow, she found that her legs really hurt a while after a run. She moved forward with small steps, afraid of stepping on the ice and falling and breaking the thermos. But suddenly her right leg twisted and she fell straight backwards. Behind her, suddenly a pair of hands held her steady. She blankly looked at the young man in front of her who had snatched the thermos in her hand. "You're all crippled and still fetching 2 thermoses of water." Yifeng glanced at her, then sneered and joked. "I heard you were very brave today. You ran with Lu Ming right after you finished running, but you fell on the track. Sure enough, here it comes again. I just think it's a pity if he fails the run and it affects the college entrance examination." She drooped her head to explain. "I don't have other thoughts about him, really. I know you don't like. You did the right thing." He laughed and looked at her seriously. "If you change places, he definitely won't help you. But you don't need to violate your own principles because of what he is. If it was me, I would help him too." Lin Zhu lowered her head and looked at her footprints in the snow, her heart trembling. In her memory, Yifeng was always nonchalant and rowdy. Occasionally when he was serious, he was always particularly gentle. Gentle and firm, with his own principles and persistence. Their footsteps stepped on the snow, making a creaking sound. The light snowflakes fell on the cashmere like road surface. She was joyous like a child. The person she likes is a very good person. He is very worth being liked. After the first snow, winter had fully arrived. With the coming of December, each day was colder than the last, yet the city became increasingly lively amidst the snowy landscape. The shop windows around the city experimental area were covered with stickers featuring Santa Claus, and the bare tree branches battered by the chill wind on campus were wrapped in dazzling eye-catching colored lights. The ambience of the new year embellished the winter, which resembled a cold and boring sculpture. On the night of the New Year's Eve, Lin Zhu was suddenly called to the Chinese office by Teacher Zhu. "There's a troublesome student in the science class who can write essays. Your essays are good. Can you help him?" "I'm going home early. The key is in the desk drawer. There are no teachers on duty at the office tonight. Remember to lock the door when you leave." Teacher Zhu finished speaking, picked up her bag and walked out of the office. Lin Zhu replied with a "okay," and then sat on the swivel chair at the desk, waiting for the advisee while aimlessly examining Teacher Zhu's lesson plans and teacher reference books on the shelf next to the computer. "So you're the expert Teacher Zhu was talking about?" A familiar male voice suddenly came from the entrance of the office, with a teasing laughter in his voice. Lin Zhu lifted her head. Her eyes lit up in an instant as she saw Yifeng appearing, and the corners of her mouth unconsciously turned up. "Why didn't you write a good essay again?" She arched her eyes and asked him with a smile. "I wish I knew too." Yifeng sighed helplessly, threw the notebook gripped with a black pencil in his hand on the desk, and randomly pulled a black swivel chair from Lin Zhu's side, sitting next to her. The chair was pulled so close to her that when he sat down suddenly, her breath unintentionally slowed a beat. Her cheeks were a little hot, and her body stiffened. She silently moved her own swivel chair a bit further away from him with the tip of her foot. Yifeng didn't notice her series of unnatural movements at all, lay on the desk tiredly, and complained with discontent. "The monthly exam was dragged down by the essay again, which prevented me from getting the first place. Now I have a physical reaction just seeing the essay paper. It's really horrifying." Lin Zhu smiled. "So there is something in this world that can scare you?" Yifeng shrugged and nodded helplessly. "Don't worry, I'll teach you how to write it. Won't let it hinder you from getting the first place." Lin Zhu comforted him with a smile. "Then I'll trust you." Yifeng's eyes lit up. He suddenly straightened up and rolled up his sweater sleeves, saying, "Start, Teacher Lin." "Okay." Lin Zhu spread several model articles she brought over on the table, picked up a red pen to carefully and patiently circle and underline for him. From how to set the topic and how to arrange the points and supporting points, to how to write a good beginning and ending, she taught him for nearly 2 hours. I got it. Yifeng looked content after listening to her explanation and raised his chin at her. Next time I'll get full marks directly. Lin Zhu was amused by him. She capped the red pen and unabashedly made a quip at him. Yifeng, can you be a little more arrogant? I can, Yifeng shamelessly replied, then suddenly asked her, what about you, dare you? Huh? Lin Zhu was taken aback by his question. I mean, do you dare to be as arrogant as me? Arrogance requires capital, she replied with a smile. Her tone, however, was decidedly sincere. Do you think you don't have enough capital? Yifeng asked with a laugh. Lin Zhu was taken aback. She didn't know how to reply, then suddenly heard the young man speak again. You've accumulated enough capital. The young man looked her in the eyes, his tone sincere and certain. In this school, you're the only one I admire. Yifeng suddenly patted her shoulder, stating warmly, so you have to be as proud as I am. You can't be unconfident anymore, understand? Lin Zhu stared blankly at the boy in front of her, her eyes suddenly warming. Her heart was also pounding fast. That winter was so warm. The young man stood in front of the window, with the dense night outside. The yellow lights on the bare tree branches were endlessly twinkling through the mist-filled glass, casting a soft, warm light over him. But his light outshone them all. She had seen many kinds of light, but none had ever illuminated her. Only the light in his eyes could fall on her, instantly illuminating her dusty world. He was a light she secretly enjoyed deep in her heart, and yet one she never dared to touch. After locking the office door, Lin Zhu returned to the classroom to get her backpack, then exited the school building with Yifeng. The icy wind on a winter night was biting, yet Lin Zhu walking next to Yifeng felt no cold. Her heart was warm because of the time they spent together in the office and the words he said to her. It felt like a little sun had risen in the icy dark night, warm and bright. What will you be doing later? Yifeng suddenly asked. Don't tell me you're going back to your dorm to study? And if I don't study, what should I do? Lin Zhu asked, almost reflexively. I'm astounded. Yifeng shook his head in disbelief. I guess you're the only one in the world who would study on New Year's Eve. And what are you going back to your dorm for? Lin Zhu asked him back. I haven't decided yet, Yifeng replied. His eyes suddenly sparkled. Do you want to go out and set off fireworks? Lin Zhu looked surprised. Let's go. You've jumped the fence before. Plus, there's no dorm check tonight. Let's go out and have some fun, Yifeng suggested, his eyebrows raised, eager. She couldn't turn him down and was once again coerced into breaking the rules. As Lin Zhu climbed the fence with a worried look on her face, she wondered why she fell for such a maverick guy who always causes trouble. With one leg on the fence and too scared to step down, Yifeng stood by, laughing, then extended his arm to her, saying, Don't be afraid, just grab hold of me. Don't be afraid, just grab hold of me. How wonderful it would be if she could hold on to him always. But alas, he was like a gust of wind that could never be easily captured. In the present, every moment spent with him, every gentle act of his felt both real and imaginary. She saw herself as a thief who stole and seized moments, just to clutch onto every second spent with him and prevent them from slipping away. She carefully handed him her arm, all the while turning her face away to avoid the gaze he fixed on her. Yifeng grabbed her arm and finally helped her over the fence, landing safely on the ground. You still need to improve, said Yifeng, his eyes still lit with laughter. You should come out with me more often. Lin Zhu kept quiet, her body shivering in the freezing cold, but her heart felt warm. In the future, huh? Yes, they still have a long, long way ahead of them. Even though he moves too fast, she only needs to try a little harder, put in a little more effort, going all out to keep up with his footsteps, and then they would surely stick together in the future. She's not afraid of suffering, nor does she fear getting tired. Because he is the one she likes. Because when she's with him, she is genuinely happy. After Yifeng took Lin Zhu to a small supermarket near the back door of the school and promised to keep the New Year's tradition setting off fireworks. While he was busy selecting sparklers at the entrance of the shop, Lin Zhu noticed a very beautiful key ring hanging on the wall inside the supermarket. It was shaped like a basketball, and she wanted to buy it as a New Year's gift for him. Inside the supermarket, a lady was cracking sunflower seeds and watching an old black and white TV at the counter. Lin Zhu picked up the key ring, asked for the price, and handed the money over. The spherical keychain was hollow, and with a gentle press of the small button, it pops open instantly. Perhaps in celebration of the new year, the shopkeeper had put a red note inside the hollow sphere with Happy New Year printed on it. Suddenly, Lin Zhu wanted to write a blessing on the note and give it to him. So she picked up a carbon pen from the counter, thought for a moment, and carefully wrote something on it. "I'm done shopping. Is there anything else you want to buy?" Yi Feng's voice called out from the entrance. "No, let's go." Lin Zhu quickly rolled up the note, stuffed it back into the hollow sphere, put the key ring in her pocket, and went over to him. At the entrance of the supermarket, Lin Zhu held an unlit sparkler in her hand, watching him light it up with a lighter. The fire crackled and lighted up, piercing through the cold, silent night, casting a glow on her petite face. "Pretty, isn't it?" Yi Feng lit the sparkler in his own hand, waving his arm and saying proudly. Yi Feng watched the sparkler very seriously, with a face full of satisfaction. His smile was clear and warm, even more dazzling than the fireworks in his hand. Lin Zhu's gaze moved from the sparkler slowly to his face, and couldn't help smiling gently. "It's beautiful," she softly replied. Then Yi Feng suddenly turned to look at her, causing her to quickly avert her gaze and attentively watch the golden light flickering from the sparkler in her hand. Not far away, a firework shot up into the sky, casting sparks in all directions. Its layers upon layers of light pierced the darkness and illuminated the night. In the middle of a winter's night, the streets were empty and silent. All that remained was the sound of fireworks exploding in the sky and the fierce beating of her heart, echoing crisply in her ears. She softly took out the key ring from her pocket and handed it to him, saying, "Happy New Year, this is your gift." Yi Feng was taken aback, touching the back of his neck awkwardly. He said, "You even got me a gift. I didn't get you anything." He grinned. "Then I have to give you something in return. What do you want?" "Just say it." "It's okay. I have everything I want," Lin Zhu said silently in her heart. "Yes, you've already given me so many gifts. Being able to meet you in my youth, to know you, that's already the best gift I've ever received." "It's okay." She shook the sparkler in her hand that had already burned out. "You've already treated me to fireworks." "All right," Yi Feng laughed, taking the keychain from her. He accidentally pressed the middle button, and the little basketball popped open. "It's a secret box, huh?" Yi Feng laughed and asked her, "What's inside it?" "Open it and see." Lin Zhu buried her face into her scarf, pretending to be mysterious. With a puzzled look, Yi Feng opened the red note and saw the stylish English words written in black. "To win the world. Go take on the world." "Inspirational, huh?" Lin Zhu asked him with a smile. "Inspirational indeed." The young man squinted, a teasing smile curling at the corner of his lips. "Do you know the first step in taking on the world?" "What is it?" "Overcoming language," he said. Lin Zhu couldn't help chuckling at his joke. On the quiet, empty winter streets, the wind blew their heavy down jackets, inflating them. They shoved their hands into their pockets, stomping their feet as they looked up at the fireworks. Time ticked away, minute by minute, and midnight was about to strike. Lin Zhu raised her arm, revealing her watch under the sleeve of her down jacket, bent her head to start counting down by the second. Right at midnight, a large firework exploded fiercely in the night sky, seeming like a meteor shower covering the entire horizon. Yi Feng turned his head to her and said, "Happy New Year." "Happy New Year." She looked at him with a joyous smile, her tone warm and caring. "Among the shower of fireworks in the sky is her most precious secret. Do you know, Yi Feng? The silent approach of my 5th year of love for you has begun." After the new year, following the end of the final exams, the winter vacation arrived quickly. During this vacation, Yi Feng didn't go back to F County but stayed at the home of relatives in the city. Since many students in Class 1 were taking remedial classes for math and science in a famous cram school in the city, Yi Feng was among them. During this vacation, Lin Zhu didn't go out much, and whenever she did, she would put on a thick cotton coat and just go, sometimes even tying her hair up hastily. Knowing that it was impossible to bump into Yi Feng when she went out during the entire vacation, she revealed her lazy and casual nature, preferring to stay home and keep warm rather than going out and freezing. Even if she had to go out, she would wear thick cotton pants and a coat. She chose warmth over aesthetics. On the night of the Lantern Festival, Jumei called her and wished her a happy Lantern Festival. Jumei spoke loudly, but still couldn't drown out the sounds of the firecrackers coming from the other end of the phone. "Are you watching fireworks outside?" Lin Zhu smiled and asked Jumei. "Yes, at the city square. There's a fireworks show here tonight, and there's a lot of people. I guess almost everyone in the city has come here." As Jumei was speaking, she stretched out her phone. "Listen." Lin Zhu sat at her study desk, Listening to the sounds of firecrackers coming from her phone, she felt warmth in her heart. So everyone in town is here? Is he there too? So right now, they are both listening to the same fireworks, feeling the same busy scene. My brother asked me to help him shoot off the fireworks. I'll talk to you later, Jiumei shouted. Lin Zhu laughed and agreed, then hung up the phone. She suddenly missed him a little. Actually, throughout the vacation spent at home, she often thought of him unconsciously. Whenever she missed him, she didn't know what to do, so she instinctively pulled out her textbooks and workbooks to study and solve problems. Constantly working hard to improve herself was the only way she could think of to get closer to him. After all, she didn't have the courage to try any other ways. Thinking of this, she once again took out the workbook beside her, opened it and started solving the problems attentively. With the completion of Lin Zhu's enriching and effective study schedule, 2 months of vacation time passed in a flash. On the first night of self-study in the second semester of high school, everything was as usual. She still had the 3 textbooks for the languages, math and foreign languages on her desk, preparing to tackle them quickly before the homework check in the morning, picking out useful problems to solve and copying down answers for the useless ones. Everything was the same, except that Yifeng now had someone he liked. Big gossip. Zhu Zhaoyu, a classmate, walked into the classroom and loudly announced to 2 of her good friends sitting in the front row. It turns out Yifeng and Xiamo like each other. I saw them going to the movies together. Lin Zhu's pen trembled slightly as she kept her head down to write. Still, she didn't stop. She didn't believe it. Really? Zhu Zhaoyu added smokingly. I saw with my own eyes. Yesterday, at the Wanda Plaza Cinema, they were sitting just in front of me. Xiamo's head was resting on Yifeng's shoulder. I can't mistake Yifeng's face. My God. But they do make a good match though. The school beauty and the school hunk? Could it be that Yifeng has stolen her from our dear boy? I wouldn't say so. Didn't Lu Ming and Xiamo have a big fight and break up? And besides, I think Yifeng and Xiamo are a better match. They're much easier on the eyes together. As Lin Zhu was flipping through the last few pages of answers, she was copying answers onto blank spaces beneath the problems. By the time she fetched up, she realized all the answers she had been copying were scrambled. Dense mathematical symbols were crumpled into a ball and thrown into her brain. With a whoosh, she tore off the last 10 or so pages of answers from the new math world, then folded the first page in half, placed it above the problem, and started copying. Her act of holding the pen and writing was very serene, unhurried, yet her heart was in chaos. Chaos, total chaos. How could he like Xiamo? Why couldn't he like Xiamo? He never said he liked you, Lin Zhu. With the pen tip of a black neutral pen resting on the white paper, Lin Zhu stared blankly at the ink stain gradually spreading under her pen. The dark ink stain wet the messy handwriting on her paper, reflecting her uneasy and flustered heart. Lo Lao walked into the class to organize the discipline. Zhu Zhaoyu closed her mouth and obediently returned to her seat. 3 periods of night study. Students in the classroom were each busy with their homework. Other than the sound of writing and flipping books, Lin Zhu could no longer hear any whispers. The silence around her blocked countless questions right in her heart. Why did the self-study environment she was used to feel so oppressive? Why did the sounds of writing and flipping books that were always around her brought such a sharp pain in her heart at this moment? Why did nobody continue speaking? Why was there no one who could clearly tell her, get over it, Lin Zhu, Yifeng really does like Xiamo? Jiu Mei and Lu Yichuan were off campus and not around. Lin Zhu dumbly looked at the empty seats in front of her, her gaze raised slightly. She glanced at Lu Ming's nape sitting in the first row. Lu Ming. Lin Zhu blankly stared at his back, as if she would go over and question him loudly in the next second. Why didn't you take care of Xiamo? Why did you let her and Yifeng get together? Why indeed? The bell for the end of the period rang and then stopped, like the tide rising and falling. She was a quiet island in the center of the sea, no longer hearing any sounds. The new math world for winter vacation still rested on the first page where it was initially opened. 3 periods passed and she didn't know what she had done. She wanted to go to class 1 and find him, not hesitating to loudly question him. How could you go behind my back and like Xiamo? But she had no right to question him. Lin Zhu, all these years, why did you think he belonged to you? He never said he liked you, don't you see? He liked someone else. He never liked you. Late at night, just before the lights went out in the dormitory, Lin Zhu, who had always been reticent, suddenly became extraordinarily talkative. From the popular TV dramas aired during the winter vacation to the sketches at the spring festival, Linzhu's roommates' incredibly mimicked performances made Linzhu laugh until tears came out. Her tears dampened her eyelashes. She held back her tears in her eyes, as if to force herself to believe in the present moment of joy being enacted, refusing to let them fall. It wasn't until the dormitory supervisor said, "All right, time to sleep," that her clear tears began to slowly fall along the corners of her flushed eyes, evaporating on her cheeks drop by drop. A huge wave of emptiness and loneliness engulfed her. Her heart felt as though it was submerged in cold water, throbbing in pain from time to time. At that moment, Linzhu suddenly realized that heart pain wasn't just a metaphor. A person's heart can really hurt like this. "Wait a minute," the girl in the opposite bed suddenly said loudly. "I remembered something. I heard today that Yifeng and Shamo like each other and even went to a cinema together. Is this true or false?" "It's probably false," the dormitory supervisor, squinting her eyes, said leisurely. "Our Yifeng wouldn't have a romantic relationship so early." "Hey Emph," the girl from the opposite bed sneered. "You should change your tune. I'll tell Shamo this one day. Let's see if she will come to our dormitory to settle things with you." "You guys are really shallow. Just how crazily are you in love with Yifeng?" "Saying it outright, isn't it just because he studies well and is handsome?" The girl from the upper bunk responded with disdain. "No way," the dormitory supervisor responded. "I look at his content. Do you understand what content is?" "Yeah, right, you're just shallow. If he didn't look this way, would you still like him?" "Okay, let's sleep. Look at your achievements. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to a few more handsome guys. Sleep, sleep." Even when the snoring filled the dorm room, Linzhu was still wide-eyed, gazing blankly at the dim yellow moon in the pitch-dark night outside the window. Was her crush really that shallow? Like many girls around her, was she just attracted to him because he was studious and handsome, and she could easily have a crush on other people tomorrow? For all these years, had her love for him also been just like this? The moon, obscured by clouds, exuded a cold, elusive light. The translucence of the full moon seemed like a curtain, reflecting a lucidity of her emotions and memories. In fact, she didn't like him that much, right? After all, he liked someone else now. After all, his taste in girls wasn't any different from the other boys. After all, the girl he liked was the school belle, Shamo. He was not worth her affection at all. Linzhu forced herself to think about his negatives, as if doing so would make her feel less distressed. Memories were projected onto the serene moon, vivid as in a movie. The more she tried to erase these memories, the more they came back, vivid and bright, especially at this moment. Such are these memories. The day they first met, he stood in the twilight smiling, his eyes curved with happiness as he excitedly asked her, "You are Linzhu?" During that exam, she accidentally sat next to him. He was constantly speaking up in her defense when the teacher criticized her, always whispering continuously in her ear, "Linzhu, Linzhu," borrowing this and that, and introducing her to the students and the invigilator as Linzhu from class 10, the one who had exceptional writing skills. The time she forgot to submit his paper, he didn't get angry at her. Instead, he noticed that she was very tired, submitted the paper himself, and told her to take a nap if she needed to. On the day of the physical education exam, when she was shivering on the springboard in front of the sandpit, he shouted from the crowd, "Do you still want to enter City Lab School?" On the first day of high school, he eagerly typed his phone number into her phone. While she was struggling to explain her poor performance in the entrance exam, he simply said, "I believe in you." After the midterm, when she was set up by Himai, she hid in the corner of the wall near the boys' dormitory and called him. He suddenly appeared in front of her, carefully handed her a tissue, escorted her to the teaching building, and spent 2 hours explaining physics problems to her. When signing up for the English competition, he stood up and insisted to the teacher that she should also participate, saying, "You must enroll her, and don't listen to her. She doesn't evaluate her abilities properly." On her birthday, he took her to a local restaurant, had the customers there sing happy birthday with him, and said, looking tenderly into her eyes, "You are really awesome." On New Year's Eve, he told her, "You must be as proud as I am," helped her sneak out of school to celebrate, invited her to light fireworks, and wished her a happy new year at midnight. These memories flooded into her mind as if they were a tidal wave. Each of her encounters with him, every expression on his face, every move he made, she cherished, tucking them away carefully in the recesses of her memory. He probably doesn't remember these memories anymore, does he? "Did you ever like me, Yifeng? Before you fell for Shamo, was there ever a time you had the slightest affection for me?" Tears cooled her eyes as they kept flowing out. Each drop trickling into her ear, felt both cold and itchy. She was on the verge of seeing light, a warmly radiating beam that gradually illuminated her previously dark world. It seemed like with just a bit more effort, she could edge closer to the light, become the light, possess the light. But in an instant, he took back that light. He gave it to another girl, the girl he truly liked. Her world plunged back into darkness, engulfed in gloom. Her heart began to contract uncontrollably, and as she curled up in her cold blanket, her body couldn't stop shivering. She couldn't understand her predicament. Was it because she wasn't working hard enough? She knew he was an impressive individual. She also understood that in order to be worthy of him, she would have to work exceptionally hard, and she was aware of it all. But exactly how hard does she need to work? Just how much exertion would suffice? After all these years, she has been trying so hard. Why is it still not enough? Actually, the girl he likes doesn't need to try as hard as her. Because they are good enough themselves, they never have to worry about whether they deserve the other person. These two people are truly well matched. Sadly, she only realizes this truth now. Lin Zhu couldn't sleep all night, and she arrived at the classroom very early the next day. Her emotions were chaotic and complex, and her brain was groggy from lack of sleep all night. Near the end of the last class in the morning, Jumei turned her head around and stretched out her hand to her. "Give me your meal card. I'll go get food at noon." Lin Zhu felt even smiling was a struggle, trying to bring up a grimace. "You give me your meal card." Jumei was taken aback. Didn't they agree to take turns getting food? Hadn't Lin Zhu just finished a week of food fetching? At the cafeteria, Lin Zhu deliberately lined up in the row closest to the male meal window. While slowly moving forward, she looked sneakily into the boy's line. She wanted to see him, yet at the same time she didn't want to. Him, who appeared with Shimo. She suddenly saw Shimo walking boldly to the front of a boy's line and snatching Luo Yichuan's meal card. "What are you doing?" Luo Yichuan pretended to be angry. "Don't take mine. Go find Yifeng from your home." Upon hearing Luo Yichuan's words, Lin Zhu's expression changed, and she herself didn't notice. "He went to buy snacks for me." Shimo blinked her eyes and said to Luo Yichuan confidently. "That's still not okay." Luo Yichuan tried to grab it back. Shimo dodged backwards, bumping directly into the boy behind her. Yifeng had both hands full of snack bags, glanced at the girl in his arms, and then smiled warmly. Lin Zhu had never seen this kind of tenderness in his smile towards anyone else. "Luo Yichuan is bullying me." Shimo pouted, throwing the meal card in her hand at Luo Yichuan. "I don't need your lousy card, here you go." "I'm being wronged, Yiji." Luo Yichuan frowned. "Your home." Shimo grabbed my meal card first. Yifeng still smiled, handing over his card to Shimo. "Don't use his, here's mine." Shimo took the card, laughed, and gave him a snug hug, then quickly lowering her head, her face blushing red. "You two are so disgusting," the group of boys led by Luo Yichuan said with a face full of disgust, loudly shouting. Lin Zhu was in a daze, always staring at them. Her heart was like a crumpled piece of paper, being repeatedly twisted by their every word and deed, becoming more and more damaged, more and more chaotic. "Student, which dishes do you want?" the aunt asked loudly again. "Oh, scrambled egg with tomato and that chilled shredded potato." Lin Zhu came back to her senses. "Both dishes, 2 orders." "What's wrong with you today? You seem listless." At the dining table, Jumei asked with a puzzled face. "Huh?" Lin Zhu lifted up her head. "Nothing's wrong." Then she forced a grin. "Probably because I didn't sleep well last night. I feel a bit dizzy. I'll be fine after going back to the dormitory and having a nap." "Okay," Jumei nodded, suddenly brightening up. "I've got a gossip to tell you to help you energize. Do you know how Yifeng and Shimo got together?" Jumei spoke with eager excitement. It said, during their winter holiday remedial classes, their maths teacher gave a bizarrely difficult problem. He said there are rewards for whoever can solve it, and those who gave up could go home early. Turned out only Shimo and Yifeng stayed till the end that night. Moreover, Shimo completed the problem ahead of Yifeng. Then the two of them went to play games in the internet cafe with the bonus they got from their maths teacher. And that evening, Shimo admitted her feelings for Yifeng, said Jumei. Lin Zhu looked up suddenly, surprised. Shimo confessed to Yifeng? Yes, for someone as smart and beautiful as Shimo, what man could resist? Certainly not Yifeng. Hearing this, Lin Zhu lowered her head, staring blankly at the chopsticks stuck in her tomato and egg soup. You see, the girls in our class were crying and shouting, unable to accept Yifeng liking someone else. Please, Yifeng didn't like anyone before, right? So you shouldn't, eh? Don't cry. Lin Zhu's tears plopped plop began to drop into the dish. Before she had a chance to wipe them, they were spotted by Jiu Mei's gaze. "What's wrong?" Jiu Mei anxiously took out 2 tissues from her bag and handed them to Lin Zhu, asking cautiously, "You don't really like Yifeng, do you?" "Of course not." Lin Zhu wiped her tears, forcing a smile. "I'm not that shallow." "You scared me." Jiu Mei sighed in relief. "What's really going on?" "It's nothing. Just someone jumped the queue when I was getting food and we had a quarrel. It upset me. By the way, have you seen that costume drama that the Hunan TV broadcast over the winter holiday?" "Which one?" "The one starring Yang Mi?" Jiu Mei was successfully veered off topic. After lunch, Lin Zhu allowed Jiu Mei to return to the dormitory first. Then she took a stroll under the tree-shaded path on the campus to clear her mind. The fragmented sunlight filtered through the green leaves, casting arc-shaped shadows on the orange-yellow cement brick-paved road. She shielded her eyes with her hands and slowly lifted her head. Once, she didn't bear to close her eyes even though the sunlight overhead was stabbing her eyes because she wanted to continue seeing him. Now, the interweaving of light and shadow in the sky above the leaves seemed like a labyrinth she couldn't escape from. He pulled her into it but decided to leave by himself. He left her alone in such a labyrinth. She closed her eyes and said to him silently in her heart, "Yifeng, starting from today, I will not like you anymore. I used to like you just like that. Luckily, you never knew. It's a pity you never knew." Xiamo became a thorn in Lin Zhu's heart that couldn't be extracted. This thorn, lodged in her heart, would occasionally ache when she was unable to solve a geometry problem or when she got more than a dozen historical multiple-choice questions wrong. For the 2 months since school started, it felt like she was holding her breath, pushing herself harder than ever. She claimed not to care, but in her heart she treated Xiamo as a rival, pushing herself to surpass Xiamo in everything, to make Yifeng regret. Countless nights of self-study, she'd be so tired she'd slump onto her desk, staring blankly at the math calculation papers with its densely packed handwriting, and suddenly feel quite dizzy. What was she doing to herself? If she had already stopped liking him, why was she still competing with Xiamo in her heart, just out of unwillingness? If she had already stopped liking him, why did she still sincerely hope that they would not be happy, also out of unwillingness? If she already had stopped liking him, maybe it was because spotting him in a crowd had become a subconscious habit for her. Since the start of the semester, she often saw him walking side by side with Xiamo on campus. She would always keep a certain distance, silently following behind them, studying the girl that Yifeng liked. The headmaster didn't allow girls to perm or dye their hair, but Xiamo always had a head of fluffy chestnut curls. Once, when the headmaster was inspecting student appearances at the entrance of the teaching building, she saw Xiamo, just about to reach the entrance, use the hair tie on her wrist to gather her hair. She gave the headmaster a pleading look and said sweetly, "Teacher, my hair naturally curls like this, really." Xiamo's skin was fair, and she supposedly used makeup on the sly. When Lin Zhu still didn't understand what applying makeup meant, Xiamo was already using foundation and blush. When she smiled, her eyes shone and there were slight dimples on her cheeks. Many people said that Xiamo and Yifeng looked like a couple. To Lin Zhu, they only looked good when both of them smiled. Why wouldn't Yifeng like such a proud and beautiful girl? She was so worthy of being loved. Beside jealousy, more of what Lin Zhu felt about Xiamo was unreachable admiration. She thought of Jiu Mei. Jiu Mei had stopped wearing her awkward white skirt for a long time. The snacks in her desk were accumulating more and more, and her relationship with Luo Yichuan had returned to the usual state of daily small fights and weekly major ones. Jiu Mei said that she tried, but she wasn't Luo Yichuan's type, so she let go. However, how can one truly achieve the calmness of letting go? After the midterm exam, the school organized the last collective movie watch for the 2nd grade. On the way, Lin Zhu asked Jiu Mei, "If you really like someone, but he doesn't like you, how can you stop liking him?" "If he doesn't like me, why should I still like him?" Jiu Mei shrugged. "If he doesn't like me, then he's a sightless scum, not deserving of my glance again." Jiu Mei was a blatant liar. For when they had just come back from a movie, she was immediately exposed. After a trip to the movies, Luo Yichuan disappeared, nowhere to be found all afternoon. Did something happen? Lin Zhu frowned. What could possibly happen to such a big guy? Jiu Mei scoffed, yet she spent 2 whole classes looking for him around the campus, following the committee members of their class. However, as soon as Jiu Mei returned to the class, she heard some girls saying, "Did you hear? Someone saw Luo Yichuan leaving with Yi Zhao. I bet they sneaked out on a date while Lao Luo was out, and Luming insists on looking for him." Jiu Mei buried her head on the desk. her back slightly shaking. Lin Zhu faintly sensed she was crying. But when Lin Zhu gently patted her on the back, Ju Mei shook her head to indicate she was fine, stood up and continued reading. Not until the bell rang for the last self-study class in the afternoon did Luo Yichuan limp into the classroom. "Where have you been? Are you okay?" Lin Zhu asked anxiously. "I'm good," Luo Yichuan hissed. Only then Lin Zhu noticed the long scrape on his left arm. "What happened to you? You should go to the infirmary," Lin Zhu exclaimed, startled. "I went there, but it was closed." Luo Yichuan sighed. "I'll go to the drugstore to get some red potion after school." "You should tell Lu Ming. Our class committee has been looking for you all afternoon." "Looking for me? For what?" Luo Yichuan was confused, saying, "Well, Yi Zhao had a fight with her family over the college application. She didn't come to class, and Yi Feng asked me to persuade her. She almost got hit by a motorcycle as she wasn't paying attention to the road. I got this scrape on my arm due to falling when I blocked for her." Lin Zhu didn't say anything, just kept looking at Ju Mei, who was focusing on her work silently. "Hey, have the math papers been distributed?" Luo Yichuan nudged Ju Mei. "Are you hiding my paper? Give it up now." "I hide what?" Ju Mei yelled. Her eyes immediately went teary, and she started crying into her desk. Luo Yichuan was startled and turned to Lin Zhu. "What's the matter with her?" "I didn't do anything." "Don't you really know?" After staring at each other for a while, Lin Zhu slowly said, "Ju Mei spent 2 lessons looking for you in the afternoon." "Looking for me? For what?" Before he could figure it out, Ju Mei suddenly sat up, pulled a tissue from the box in her desk, dampened it with a bit of mineral water, then yanked Luo Yichuan's left arm over and gently wiped away the dirt and grit from his scrape. Luo Yichuan stared blankly at Ju Mei's tear-stricken eyes, moving not an inch, like a stone statue. Ju Mei's movements were light, even softly blowing on the wound. Lin Zhu had never seen such a patient and meticulous Ju Mei, and she certainly hadn't seen Luo Yichuan acting so obedient like a little rabbit. A complex emotion emerged in Luo Yichuan's eyes which Lin Zhu couldn't quite understand. He didn't evade, didn't snatch the tissue to do it by himself. He just silently watched Ju Mei. Everyone knew that Luo Yichuan liked Yi Zhao, but in her heart of hearts, Lin Zhu hoped that Luo Yichuan would fall for Ju Mei. During evening study, there was a sudden thunderstorm outside the window, and the heavy rain poured down. After the bell rang for the end of class, Lin Zhu remained in the classroom continuing on her work, only leaving after the room was completely empty. After all, she had an umbrella in the classroom, and she wasn't concerned about the rain getting heavier. However, as soon as she walked out the door of the teaching building, she spotted Yi Feng among a small group of people taking cover from the rain. She initially intended to open her umbrella and leave right away. But he didn't have an umbrella. His t-shirt was half soaked from the rain, and he was coughing persistently, his lips pale and cracked. "Yi Feng, didn't you bring an umbrella?" She hesitated for quite a while before finally approaching him. "Well, I didn't expect it to start raining suddenly." He noticed the umbrella in her hand and said in surprise, "You brought an umbrella even when the weather was clear. You really have foresight." After saying that, he coughed several times again. "Have you caught a cold?" "Yeah, I took a cold shower after playing soccer yesterday and it seems like I've caught a chill." He grinned, revealing a transparent and attractive smile. Seeing it, Lin Zhu felt a thin veil clouding her eyes and a soreness came over her heart. "This umbrella of mine is pretty big. Do you want to share it on the way back to the dormitory?" "Yi Feng." Xiamo ran over, panting heavily. "I tried to borrow an umbrella but couldn't find any. How am I going to do this?" "It's all your fault for insisting on finishing that problem before you're willing to leave. Now it's raining so heavily." "I can lend you my umbrella." Lin Zhu paused, and then said with a forced smile, "I have a friend who brought an umbrella too. She's just in the restroom. I can share hers." "Really? Thank you, classmate." Xiamo excitedly took the umbrella. Seeing the hesitation in Yi Feng's eyes, Lin Zhu gave him a reassuring smile. "Go ahead, just remember to return it tomorrow." And so she stood by the doorway, gazing at the 2 retreating figures. What stood between her and their retreating figures was the heavy rain. The rain blurred her view and separated her into a different world from theirs. She was left behind and discarded by him in the world behind him. In the far-off distance, the dim glow of the streetlights flickered under the onslaught of the heavy rain, like a child who had cried, his eyes red, winking at her. The rain poured down, hitting the ground as if it would never cease. Wouldn't one day it will stop? The rain dripped down from her hair, and she removed the bag that had been shielding her head, letting the rain-soaked clothes cling to her. It was as if the downpour could wash away all the fatigue and sadness that clung to her, and let those worries that she didn't want to remember again gradually disappear and melt away. This adolescence reign of hers would one day cease. However, she had overestimated her body's endurance. The very next morning, she woke up with a stuffed nose and a sore throat. The rain of the previous night caused her to completely forget the English text she hadn't memorized yet. When the English teacher came into the class, the first thing she said was, "Linzu, recite the first paragraph." She nervously rose from her seat, sniffled, and kept silent. "Did you memorize it?" The English teacher's chilly voice echoed in the room. Linzu shook her head. "Oh really, Linzu? So you believe your English is so good you don't need to memorize the texts, right?" The English teacher gave her a sideways glance, then turned to Lu Ming. "Your turn, first paragraph." Lu Ming slowly stood up and said, "Sorry." The English teacher slapped her textbook down on the lectern. "No way," Luo Yichuan whispered to Ju Mei. "I saw Lu Ming memorizing it in person in the dorms last night." "Luo Yichuan, your turn." Luo Yichuan suddenly jumped up, steadied the desk, and started reciting haltingly. After Luo Yichuan finished, the English teacher glanced at Lu Ming and Linzu. "You two, see me in my office for the recital before evening study." It was dinner time, and only Linzu and Lu Ming were left in the classroom. Linzu's throat was sore, and she was memorizing lessons lying on the table. She saw Lu Ming walking towards her. "I'm going to buy dinner from the supermarket. Do you want me to bring something for you?" She shook her head. "Do you have a cold?" She nodded. Lu Ming didn't say anything else and left. When he came back, he brought her a sandwich and a box of cold medicine. "Thank you. How much are these?" she asked. "It's all right." Lu Ming smiled at her faintly and returned to his seat. Linzu watched his retreating figure, a bit surprised, yet also a bit moved. So Lu Ming also had such a caring side. "So Xiamo, why don't you like him?" Linzu had a fever. During the afternoon self-study class, she packed her bag and planned to go to the medical room for An 4 to reduce her fever. However, as soon as she stepped into the medical room, she saw Yifeng hanging a dripper and playing games with one hand. "What's wrong with you? Your face is pale as paper. It looks like you're about to faint." He looked up at her and asked. "It's nothing, just a bit of a fever." Her voice was hoarse and sounded shaky. "Is your cold still not getting better?" "Yeah," Yifeng shrugged helplessly. Linzu sat down on the bed next to Yifeng's. When the nurse came to give her an injection, Yifeng put down his game and peered over curiously. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Aren't you girls afraid of getting shots?" "I wonder if you're afraid," he said. "Childish." Linzu moved aside and her hand was smacked by the nurse. "Don't move. Your veins are hard to find already. It's even harder if you move." Linzu obediently laid still. After several unsuccessful tries, the nurse sighed. "Let's change hands." So Linzu had no choice but to give out the other hand. She noticed Yifeng frowning. "I've never seen anyone who isn't afraid of pain like you." The nurse smiled embarrassingly after several unsuccessful attempts at finding the vein. "She's not fearless, she's resilient." Yifeng sighed. "Can you please stop and call your master over?" After the nurse left, Yifeng turned to her with a cold expression. "She's clearly not good enough, and you just sit there and let her prick you over and over." Linzu just smiled. "Can't you just mind your own business? Please." After the needle was in place, she opened her political science book. Yifeng looked up from his game console and sighed, muttered "You're something else," and then put his game console on silent mode. Halfway through her saline drip, Linzu went to the bathroom. When she walked out of the restroom with her fur bag in hand, she saw Shimo sitting on Yifeng's bed from a distance. The infusion room wasn't crowded. Shimo caressed Yifeng's forehead affectionately. She watched them. A wave of bitterness surged in her heart. Her hand holding the fur bag unknowingly drooped. "Hey, the girl at the bathroom door. The blood is flowing back. Lift your bag up," a passing nurse yelled. Startled, Linzu snapped back to reality, looked down and noticed the red blood that had filled half of the infusion tube. She quickly lifted the bag high. She noticed Shimo and Yifeng's gaze falling on her. She returned to her bed, hung up the saline bag, and smiled awkwardly at Yifeng. "Were you burnt silly or are you acting silly? How could you forget about your four?" Yifeng asked her. Shimo glanced at her, then turned to Yifeng and said, "I'm going back to study. Remember to take your medicine." Yifeng nodded as he watched Shimo leave. "Hey, Shimo brought snacks." Yifeng pointed to the large bundle on his bed. "Do you want some?" Lin Zhu shook her head, trying to pull up a polite smile, but her lips kept drooping. Who wants Xiamo's stuff? She closed her book, saying she was tired, lay down facing away from him, and at last closed her eyes, letting tears seep out from the corners of her eyes. Yi Feng, I really hate you.